What is the scariest flaw in the reality you lived and no one believes you? For a long time, I've tried to make sense of something strange that happened to me when I was a child, something I've never been able to fully explain. It was a normal day at school, or at least that's what I thought. I had changed schools a few months earlier, so I was still getting used to the new routine and getting to know the people around me. However, something very peculiar happened the first day I walked into computer class. The teacher teaching us completely baffled me. I couldn't stop looking at her because she reminded me so much of my old computer teacher, who had the same facial features, the same hair type, even the same tone of voice at my previous school. But there was something strange about her. Although she looked the same, her attitude and personality were completely different. My old teacher was strict and somewhat distant, while this new one was much more friendly and open, which was a relief in a way, but it also disconcerted me. It was as if I was seeing someone very familiar, but at the same time completely alien to the reality I knew. At first, I let it go, thinking that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of how much I missed my old school. But it didn't end there. A few days later, I met a classmate at the same school who bore a striking resemblance to a girl from another year. One I had met at summer camp a few years before. She was so similar that it made me feel uncomfortable. The same features, the same way of smiling, even her gestures seemed to be the same. I looked at this girl and felt as if time had gone backwards, as if I were seeing my friend from camp, but in a different body. At that moment, I began to question whether it was really her or if it was some strange coincidence. I mentioned to some friends that she made me think of her, but they all told me that it wasn't possible that this girl was completely different in the following days. I kept running into more people who somehow seemed to bear a striking resemblance to someone I knew. A classmate looked just like a distant cousin of my mother's, but with a slight difference in her walk. Another girl in the hallway had a smile exactly like one of my aunts, even though I'd never seen her before. My mind began to spin with these strange coincidences, but the most disconcerting thing was that I never got to know these people in a deep way. They were like versions of someone I already knew, but they never fully connected with the reality I was living. The worst of all was the feeling I was left with after each encounter. Every time I saw someone who reminded me of someone from my past, there was a strange feeling, as if reality was playing tricks on me. It was as if I lived in a world where people were repeating themselves, but with slight changes in their personalities. I could never understand if they were the same individuals or if I was stuck in some kind of loop where people only changed location but not essence. Every time I encountered another double, the feeling of bewilderment grew stronger. I began to wonder if we were somehow doomed to meet again and again, transformations of ourselves, but distorted in one way or another. I never spoke about this to anyone because I always thought they would call me crazy. Also, the feeling that the people I encountered weren't exactly who they seemed to be made me think that maybe I wasn't seeing things clearly. Over time, the experience faded from my memory, but the images of those people, so similar to those I knew, never completely disappeared. Now, years later, I still wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me or if I really experienced something out of the ordinary. What I do know is that those sensations, those encounters with doubles, left a mark on me. Perception of reality, and even today I wonder if there's something deeper behind those coincidences. If you enjoy it, subscribe. What I'm about to tell you happened a few years ago, but it still haunts me like an echo of something I could never fully understand. My mother and I had been visiting her grandmother's grave, a woman who had been a dressmaker and had taught my mother everything she knew about sewing. That morning had been peaceful, full of nostalgia and memories, but at some point while we were returning from the grave, something happened that I can't explain. We returned home, and just before getting into the car, something shiny caught my eye on the inside of the vehicle door. I thought it could be something simple, maybe a lost coin or something made of metal reflecting the sunlight, but when I got closer, I saw it was a pair of scissors. It wasn't just any scissors, it was a shiny, perfectly intact dressmaker's scissor with an engraving on the handle that showed a small flower. It was exactly the kind of scissors my grandmother used to use, the same ones my mother had proudly shown me when I was little, as if they were an object of great sentimental and almost sacred value. My mother quickly approached me when she saw me looking at the scissors, and although at the time we didn't say it out loud, we both felt the same thing, the feeling that something didn't fit. How had those scissors gotten there in the car, in the strangest possible place? Neither my mother nor I had put anything there. It was impossible. My mind tried to rationalize it, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way those scissors appeared so unexpectedly in the car, as if someone had wanted us to find them, although we didn't know who and why. At first, I thought someone else had left them in the car, but there was no logical reason for it. The car was locked, and there was no evidence that anyone else had touched it. Besides, why leave such symbolic scissors in such a particular place? Just as we were returning from a place so full of family memories, my mother, equally bewildered, decided to put the scissors away as if they were a common object. But I couldn't help thinking that something else was at stake. The scissors, which had once been a simple sewing object, now seemed to have an invisible connection to something beyond what we could see or understand. That night, as I put the scissors in a small case in the closet, I felt the air in the house heavy, as if something was watching us. The same feeling of unease accompanied me for several days, as if something was lurking. It wasn't fear, but rather a strange feeling of being watched. The strangest thing is that, although I never told anyone about the scissors, my mother began to dream with her grandmother in the following days, something that didn't happen often. In those dreams, her grandmother spoke to her, but not in a traditional way, but as if she were telling her something that only she could understand. I can't say for sure if it was the scissors that caused that connection or if it was a whole set of factors. All I know is that from that day on, I could never stop thinking about how she had appeared in that place or what she could have meant. Perhaps it was simply a coincidence, or maybe there was something more behind those scissors, something we couldn't see. But what was clear to me is that sometimes the most mundane things have a way of appearing at just the right moment, and the mystery of those scissors never stopped haunting my mother and me. The following story: I found myself in a shopping center, parked in front of one of the stores, while doing a quick purchase. I was tired. My day had been long, but there was nothing unusual about the surroundings, just the common bustle of people in a crowded place. I parked my motorcycle and, as always, made sure to lock the brake disc. Something I never forgot to do. It was a habit, part of the routine I always followed to protect my motorcycle. While I was away, I had no reason to doubt the security it provided, and I had always been very careful with those things. When I returned, I didn't think about the lock or the motorcycle. I just wanted to get back home. When I got on the motorcycle, I stopped a few steps and suddenly something wasn't right. In my haste to leave, I had forgotten to remove the lock, but there was something even stranger. The motorcycle was moving forward without any problems. Without the lock removed, this made me stop for a moment and look at the brake. It was possible that the lock wasn't actually blocking the wheel, but I didn't see it clearly. The lock was in place, not moving, as if nothing was obstructing the wheel. I stood there confused, staring at the bike, trying to understand what had happened. I thought maybe the lock had come loose or that the wheel wasn't completely locked, but it didn't make sense. The bike should have been completely immobilized. It couldn't be moving forward without any effort, much less without the lock having impeded it. I then decided to check the lock more carefully and realized it was firmly in place, just as I had left it. It was as if the bike had been completely ignoring that small obstacle. There was no logical explanation for it. I gritted my teeth, thinking that maybe something in the lock or brake structure must be faulty. However, when I looked back at the bike, something in my mind told me that what I was thinking wasn't happening. Something I couldn't understand, but it was right there in front of me. I took a moment to try to think rationally, but the doubts continued to haunt me. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about what had happened, but I couldn't find any logical way to explain it. The strangest thing was that for a moment, I felt like my bike had not only broken through the lock, but had defied all logic. The disc brake should have been completely locked, and yet there it was, as if nothing had happened. For weeks, I kept checking the lock on the bike, but I never experienced the same thing again. Even though my logic told me it must have all been a coincidence, a simple system glitch, I couldn't help but think something wasn't right. Next story: there was something about my life that, despite all the years that have passed, is still difficult to understand, as if reality itself had stopped for a second, leaving me stuck in a loop I couldn't explain. I remember the day with astonishing clarity, as if I were still standing there in the kitchen, watching my mom prepare breakfast. It all started one morning, like any other. When I woke up and got ready to that day, there was nothing to suggest that anything would be different. Nothing to make me think I would experience one of those strange moments that make us question our own perception of reality. I got out of bed and, as usual, went to the kitchen. My mother was already there, preparing breakfast with the same routine as always. The sound of boiling water, the aroma of coffee filling the house. My little brother was sitting at the table playing with his breakfast, and everything seemed normal. But at that moment, something changed. When I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother, I saw her exactly as I had seen her in a dream the night before. Not only her appearance, but the way she moved, the way she spoke to me, was exactly the same. At first, I thought I was simply thinking about the dream, but the feeling of déjà vu was so strong, so vivid, that I froze for a moment. My mind began to panic. I had already lived through that moment, but with such precision that it frightened me. The tone of his voice, the exact words he said, even the gesture with which he served me coffee. Everything was an exact repetition of what I had dreamed the night before. He looked at me, smiled, and in my mind, for a second, everything stopped. The dream and reality had merged so seamlessly that I couldn't tell which was which. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt like something wasn't right, as if I had crossed an invisible line separating what should be everyday life from something much stranger, something I couldn't understand. I tried to shake that thought off, but the feeling of being stuck in a cycle remained. I sat down at the table, and the conversation continued as usual. My brother made a joke about my way of eating something that also seemed straight out of my dream. Every word, every movement felt so real, but at the same time, so artificial, as if I were watching a movie in which I was the only one. Aware spectator that everything was repeating itself, even when I got up to go to school. Every step seemed to follow the exact same rhythm as the dream, as if I were reliving each moment, as if reality itself had been programmed to repeat itself. At first, I tried to think it was just another dream, one of those experiences that have no logical explanation, but the fact that everything happened with such precision and clarity made me wonder if there was something else at play. Was it a glitch in my mind, a mistaken reality, or just a strange game of fate? I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling of déjà vu extreme, a sensation that went beyond simple familiarity. It was as if my life had stopped, and for a brief moment, I had experienced a loop in which everything was repeated exactly the same. That feeling stayed with me for days, but reality was never the same again. Even though I tried to rationalize it, I always had that feeling that something was distorted, as if time and space weren't as constant as I thought. It's possible that we're trapped in a cycle we're unaware of, or that sometimes reality just slips out of our control, leaving us with the feeling that we've been through it all before. I don't know if I'll ever find an explanation for that moment, but what I do know is that I could never stop thinking about that strange repetition of events, and how for a moment life itself seemed to break apart. The following story was a quiet afternoon. My mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and my dad and I were in the living room watching television. Suddenly, the house phone started ringing. It wasn't unusual. The phone usually rang often, as we sometimes received calls from friends or family. My dad got up to answer it as he always did and answered the phone in the same calm, usual voice. However, something about the conversation was strange from the beginning. We heard her begin to speak, but the person on the other end wasn't a stranger. It was the voice of my aunt, who had passed away a few years before. At first, my dad didn't seem to notice what was happening and simply began to have a conversation with her as if it were a normal conversation. My mom, who was in the kitchen, approached upon hearing the tone of the conversation and stared at my dad. Something in his face changed. She knew something wasn't right. The timbre of the voice she heard didn't match that of my aunt, who had died. It was exactly her tone, her laugh, even her expressions. But we knew it couldn't be her. She was gone. When my mom approached and saw that my dad was so engrossed in the conversation, she asked in a low voice, "Who's on the phone?" My dad, completely surprised, handed the phone to my mom, who remained silent upon hearing the familiar voice on the other end of the line. My mom began to ask questions, but the response they received was coherent, as if the voice was trying to communicate but couldn't structure the words correctly. Then suddenly, the call was cut off. There were no goodbyes or warm farewells, just silence. My mom, still trembling, hung up the phone and looked at my dad, who was also visibly confused. The most disconcerting thing about all this was that at that moment, my aunt wasn't alive, and the call seemed completely normal, as if nothing strange had happened. However, after the call ended, both my mom and my dad felt an inexplicable feeling that something had changed. They looked at each other with the same confusion and a feeling of unease. How could it be that my aunt had been talking to them if she was no longer there? How had that call come in? No one in the house could explain it. No one we tried to contact about the matter seemed to have a logical answer. Simply the voice of someone who was no longer there somehow came through the phone and left us with a strange feeling that we couldn't shake. From that day on, the phone call became a mystery in our family. No one else heard anything like it, but we all knew something inexplicable had happened that afternoon. We didn't give the call much importance at first, but the feeling of bewilderment haunted us for years. No one could ever come up with an explanation that made sense, and although over time we tried to rationalize it, there will always be that persistent doubt. Was it a glitch in the telephone network? Some kind of inexplicable phenomenon that we don't understand? No one knows, but that call was a reminder that sometimes reality can fall apart for a second, leaving us with more questions than answers. Story. I've always considered myself a fairly rational person, someone who prefers to find logical and scientific explanations before getting carried away by strange or paranormal ideas. However, there's something that happened a few years ago that, although I tried, I could never explain logically or rationally. The experience I'm about to tell you about happened in an ordinary moment, like any other day in my life. But something broke in that moment, and what happened left a mark on my perception of reality that has never completely faded. The day had been long, but I was finally ready to rest. I went into the bathroom to wash my face, as I did every night before getting into bed. The bathroom light was on, and the darkness of the hallway contrasted with the warm light coming from the room. I looked in the mirror, rubbing my eyes and trying to clear my head a little when something strange happened. It wasn't immediate, but there was a moment, a fleeting instant, when I looked at my reflection and realized something wasn't right. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a simple mistake, peripheral vision playing tricks on me, but upon closer inspection, I realized what had happened. My reflection wasn't doing what I was doing. The first thing that caught my attention was that my reflection was looking away. It wasn't a movement I had consciously made. I was standing there, watching my face in the mirror, but my reflection seemed to be looking to the left, as if it were looking down the hallway. I thought maybe the light from the mirror was playing with the shadows, and I tried to calm down. But what happened next was even more disconcerting. While I was there, staring into the mirror, my reflection began to smile, but it wasn't a smile I would have made. It wasn't the same expression I had on my face. My reflection was smiling in a strange way, as if it had a hidden agenda, something that I couldn't understand. My heart started beating faster, and even though I tried to tell myself it was nothing, I was just imagining things. The reflection continued smiling even when I wasn't. It was as if it wasn't under my control. As if the image in front of me had a life of its own. I stood there motionless, staring at my reflection, trying to understand what was happening. I didn't know if my mind was playing tricks on me or if there really was something strange in that room. But I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. That's when suddenly the reflection began to move its lips as if it were speaking, but I couldn't hear anything. The sound of water running in the sink was the only thing I could hear. I felt completely disconnected from reality, as if I had crossed some invisible line and was now trapped in a strange moment where my reflection no longer represented me. It was so terrifying that I instinctively took a step back, away from the mirror, hoping everything would go back to normal. For a moment, the reflection did. It was back in sync with me. And the smile disappeared, but that feeling, that unease persisted, even though my reflection was the same again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in reality had become distorted. Several hours passed after that experience, and although I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The reflection had never displayed such behavior before, and what puzzled me the most was that, despite my mind trying to explain what had happened, there was no logical reason that could fit. My reflection shouldn't have smiled that way, nor was there any reason for it to be out of sync with me. Over time, I tried to forget that moment, but that strange feeling that something wasn't right in that room never completely went away. Since then, I found myself looking more closely in mirrors, wondering if I would ever see anything out of the ordinary again. Something that would make me question reality once again. Because even though I finally tried to convince myself that it had been just a hallucination or a misperception, the memory of that inappropriate reflection that smiled when I didn't is still one of the most disturbing moments of my life.